Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Christina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Christina Schmidt. Today's topic is, I wouldn't say a sought after topic, but it is most definitely one of the biggest things that people want to learn when they join me in a leadership program. And so I want to go through a couple of ways that we can do it. And so the topic is giving feedback, but specifically, how do I give feedback so that I'm showing someone I'm being helpful? Because so many times we might give feedback, but people just don't find it helpful. And whether that's something that they're doing or something about them, I know personally, sometimes when I get feedback in certain ways or from certain people, that I'm like, oh, they don't like me and it's insulting. And so there's a lot of people that will feel that way. And it usually stems from something in their history about how they feel about feedback or how it was given or what the intention behind it was in the past somewhere. So it can be a struggle. So it's important to do it the right way. Otherwise, people will take it as an insult. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that people listening to this podcast are not intending to insult. So I want to give you 3 ways to give feedback: a good way, a better way, and the best way. All right, so let's kick in right away because I just want to make this like snappy, quick, good podcast that you can come back to and re-listen if you need to refresh your memory, refresh the process in your brain, whatever works for you. So let's kick in the good. All right, so the good way to give feedback so that people know that you're helping them and not insulting them is to use a simple 5-step process. And I have this outlined on a freebie that's on my website. So if you want to go check that out, go to my website, christinaschmidt.ca/resources. And I think it's a hashtag discussions or something, or difficult conversations. Anyway, it's on that resources page. I will link it down in the show notes. But the good way is using a simple 5-step process. And so step 1 is to develop like an understanding or common ground. And so really what you're doing is you're finding something that you can both agree to first. And typically when you're giving feedback, particularly in a work setting or particularly about, something wasn't met, an expectation wasn't met, the best is that it's an agreed upon expectation. So if it's an agreed upon expectation already, you've already agreed to that. So you're just reminding them, hey, we said that we agreed that this would be done by Tuesday at 3:00. Yeah. They can't say no to that because they've already agreed to it. Or it's about the start time, right? Like, hey, work starts at 7. Yep. Like they can't say no to that. So find something that you both agree on and get basically on that same page, because once they said yes, and I'm not trying to manipulate anybody, but they've agreed to it. So that's admitting to, hey, okay, we're on the same agreement here. Sometimes things aren't followed because they forgot or something else is getting in the way. We've got these competing sort of commitments, that kind of thing. But the key thing is step 1 is developing that agreement. Step 2, objectively state the feedback. So this one is probably the most important one. I mean, obviously developing that agreement first is very important, but doing this one right probably takes the most preparation. So the key is to state it objectively in a way that you're not accusing. And this is really where the rubber meets the road as far as not insulting them or people seeing that you're being helpful. So let's take the example of something that was due at 3:00. So you would open up the conversation. You'd say, hey, we agreed that this would be done by 3:00 on Tuesday. It's 5:00 on Tuesday. I still don't have it. So I did 2 things there. So I objectively stated it. They can't disagree with the fact that it's 5:00 on Tuesday or 8:00 on Wednesday or whatever time it is that is beyond 3:00 on Tuesday. They can't deny that. And I've said, I'm not seeing it. So this is the key important ingredient, that you're stating what you've observed. And I know a lot of times we think, hey, it's got to be fact-based. So I have to know for sure that it's correct. But the thing is once you start doing this a lot, like, you're not insulting them. You're just saying, hey, I'm not seeing it. And you actually legit might just not have found it because maybe it got stuck in their outbox. That tends to happen a lot, at least those of us who use Outlook. You hit send and somehow it got stuck in my outbox and I don't know what happened. Let me resend it. Now the problem is solved. Nobody's insulted. We just know that Outlook did that weird thing that it always likes to do, or periodically likes to do, we'll say. But other times it's just not trying to put the wall up, because sometimes it is something they're struggling with or did struggle with, or there's a reason they haven't met the expectation. So you don't want to insult and put people's walls up, because now you start saying, hey, you didn't get this done. Now you've insulted and they're like, I have to defend myself. And when we get in that defensive mode, we're not open to feedback. We think someone's out to get us, and we're just not going to do things well. We're not going to respond well to that. And people will think you're out to hurt them, not help them. So that totally blows the plan, right? So we want to make sure you're not using the word you. And that is the key component to this. You're saying it objectively in a way that you're just stating a fact that you know. So your observations are your facts in this respect. So if it's a punch out, hey, I looked at the punches and I'm not seeing you in by 7. So that's a way to kind of say, hey, I objectively am seeing something, but maybe something happened. And that leads us to the third step, which is, hey, can you help me out? Can you tell me what happened? So the words are, just tell me about it, essentially. You want them to now tell you what happened. Now, if you've accused and you said you, and you say this, you will get a defensive, I didn't know, I didn't do it, you didn't help me, you'll get more defensiveness. If you legit stated the expectation that we agreed to and you said, hey, I'm just not seeing it. You're not accusing, you're just saying this is where I'm at. And they say, oh, you know what, I sent that. You didn't get it? And then you can go and they can look in their thing and they say, oh, it was the Outlook thing again. To give you a real life example of how this actually worked for a client of mine. So they are a group of people that work, some people on site, some people off site. So they are using VPNs, they've got that kind of connection, and they're designing things. So they're into, Unigraphics or something like that, where they're in designing things. So there were several instances where they were supposed to have fixed a dimension and they were finding at the plant that it wasn't happening. And so they could have gone, hey, we asked you to fix this, but you didn't do it. Could have gone at it like that, at which point the person says, I did. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. And then now they're frustrated. Problem is not solved. Problem is not found, and problem is not solved. My client used these 3 steps, and they said, hey, we're seeing several instances where, I've asked you to do this and I'm not seeing it. I'm coming back and again, and it's still the old dimension. And he said, you know what? I just swear I'm doing this. Sometimes when I'm submitting it, it kind of shuts down. So maybe it's not saving. And so they said, oh, well, that's interesting. So something new came out, and it turned out that there was a connection thing. They were able to go to the manufacturer of the software. They were fix it up, and now it's not happening anymore. So if you come kind of guns a-blazing, or even not guns a-blazing, but accusing tone saying you didn't do it, you would never get to the solution. So instead, you're just going to get more headbutting, less trust, worse relationship, and still no improvement in the results. So you want to come at it without using you, and then open it up for them to explain or share their perspective, essentially. So step 4, after you've shared perspectives, you agree to, okay, what are we going to do about it? In the case of my client, they said, hey, let's look into this because that's a problem, and it's probably getting it in more cases, and it might bite us in the rear end at some point. And, in other cases, it's like, I got stuck here, I got distracted and pulled away from here. Okay, so what's the action? Well, if I get distracted, maybe I should come see you because I need to know where my priorities are and I'm not sure which one it is going to be. Okay, great. So the next time you have an incident, you're going to come and you're going to chat with me about priorities if you've got something that's going to pull you from getting it done. Okay, great. And when are you going to get this one into me so that we can, make sure that we've got it moving to the next step? Okay, tomorrow at 3:00. Perfect. Come see me if come see me if there's something that, trying to get in the way, because this one's going to probably take priority. And great. Awesome. Glad we had this talk. So that's step 5. Kind of wrap it up, agree to what the follow-up might be, and you're done. So simple 5 steps. So just to review them quickly, get some kind of agree to an agreement. So state the agreement objectively without the word you. State what the problem was. 3rd step, let them tell you what their side of the story is. 4th step, agree to an action. 5th step, agree to follow up and kind of say, go get them, some encouragement level, right? So cheer them on a bit. And that's it. So that's the good way to do it. So really good. I've got that process you can follow. It's even got some mindset preparation stuff that I'll get into next. And very effective, very helpful, especially when you're just starting to get better at it. I know I used a process like this when I was in leadership because I kind of come from a long family that doesn't like to give feedback. So I find it very hard. So I don't give feedback. And then when I do, I go, blah, 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 and I give really bad feedback. So using a process like this helps me structure my thought and make sure I do it a little bit more often. All right, so that was the good. The better is doing all those things, but adding empathy in there. All right, so where does empathy come in? Empathy comes in typically on the front end. So it's part of developing your mindset around step 1. So empathy can look like, okay, I'm going to, some of the good ways to do it. I'm going to think of this most generous interpretation. So I'm going to think, okay, they didn't get the thing to me by 3:00. You know what? Maybe they got distracted. Maybe they did get pulled away. And so I'm going to come in with a mindset. I'm not going to say what I think it is, because now you're kind of laying up an excuse and you're kind of pigeonholing them into something because maybe they don't want to disagree with you. So don't say it, but get it in your brain so that you've got some kind of empathy. You're not coming in like really annoyed and very angry at it. You're coming in with, okay, something's happened. I know they didn't do it on purpose. I know they didn't miss this expectation on purpose. Something's gone wrong. Let's go hear what it is. So I'm able to come at it with curiosity instead of accusation. And so same 5-step process, but I've added empathy. And so this is the better way. Now, another way you can develop empathy is understanding and knowing the working geniuses of your team. And the way that this helps is that it can help us think through what might actually be getting in the way, because we all have to do work in our frustrations and competencies, and those are probably the areas where we're going to be getting more feedback because we avoid it, we're slower at it than some people, we might actually need help on it, we struggle to focus on it. Like, all these things happen when we're trying to work in our frustrations. So that's probably going to be where it's at. So just to give another example of where I saw this come through with a different client is, so they were having this great person who was super helpful, and they were always wanting to help, always wanting to kind of jump in, but they weren't finishing things. And so they would, it'd say, hey, you're going to get this done. Yeah. But then somebody else would come along and they get distracted and they go and create something new and do this exciting thing. So when you think about what their geniuses are and what they might be, my guess, and I don't know because we didn't do it with this person, but my guess is that it's invention and enablement. They want to help and they can't say no because they really, really want to help, and they love to create something new. They probably have, if you use Colby or something else, a quick start, but what it is that their finishing is not their strength. It's not their genius. So what you're saying is now you've developed empathy because you're like, hey, I'm asking them to operate outside their genius. They need to, and we have to hone in on that, but I'm asking them to operate outside their genius, so I'm going to need to support them more. As their manager, I'm going to need to help them. So you can come in and say, hey, I love that you're helping people. I do. However, we need to get this thing finished, or these 3 things finished. I can see, I know from your Working Geniuses you love to invent, but how can I support? And so you're just kind of adding that little level in, and maybe it's part of the discussion, but you're adding that extra ingredient. You're showing, hey, I understand this is hard for you. How can I better support you during this? Do you need me to come see you more often when you're doing these tasks, or at the end of a project, do I need to come hang out more? Like, what does that look like? And one thing I want to say before I get off this one, this is not a poop sandwich. Okay, so what I mean by that is there is a formerly popularized way of giving feedback, which is tell them something good, tell them something bad, tell them something good. That is not effective because now you're distracting it. You're muddying the waters. What you're trying to do is tell them the thing that didn't work and figure out how to make it work. That's what you're trying to do when you're giving feedback because you're trying to be helpful. So when we sandwich it between 2 things that they are doing well, it's like, was that a compliment or a criticism? And now they're just confused. So it's not a helpful way to give feedback. However, some people like to try to do it that way. But what you're doing is you're developing empathy. So you're saying, I understand it's hard and we still need to do it. So you develop the empathy, but you're also helping to move it forward. So I'm not sandwiching it in with something they're doing well. I am understanding that this thing is hard. So difference there. All right. And the third way, this is the best way to give feedback so that people know you're being helpful. And this is very simple, but very not simple at the same time, but it's you have trust. So I did a whole podcast series on trust and empathy and why they're important, how to build them. So go back and listen to those 2 things for these, better and best ways. But when you have trust, you can give feedback however you want because somebody knows they trust you and they know you're coming at it from the best possible way. I would still highly recommend using the 5-step process, using empathy, but when you have trust, if you mess it up, you're not going to mess up the relationship. And even when you do a bit of an accusatory, people are like, oh, they have empathy for you because they trust you and they say, ooh, something's going on with them. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Maybe say it better next time, but I hear what you're saying, so I'm going to go do this with it. So because you've built a strong relationship, because you've spent the time getting to know the person, understanding their geniuses, understanding where they struggle, understanding maybe where they're at personally, that something is harder for them because of something else going on in their lives. You've built that trust and empathy. And now anything that might feel like conflict, which sometimes feedback does for people, it's okay because you have the strength in the relationship. So the best way to do feedback is to have trusting, safe space for people to be in because they know that the feedback is genuine. It's to help them, it's to help the company, it's to help the team, and everybody's on that same page. So good, better, and best ways to give feedback. I would love some feedback from you as to whether this was helpful. But on that note, I have 2 things I want to share with you. So the first one is regarding feedback. So I have a little contest that I'm going to do, and I want to do something for the podcast listeners. So because I'm constantly talking about Working Genius, I want to give you a better understanding of it. So what I'm going to be giving away is a free assessment as well as a free feedback session with me on my podcast. So I'm going to say live on the podcast, but we're live recording on the podcast. So this will, number one, gives people a great way to understand. So it'll give all the listeners a great way to understand what that looks like to get a Working Genius feedback session. But it also will give that opportunity to that person to really dive into their geniuses and what they love to do and what they don't love to do. So if you would like to have an opportunity to be on the podcast and have a free assessment and get your feedback for that assessment with me while we're recording for our podcast. So if you would like that opportunity, here's what you got to do. So you have to leave me a review on whatever podcast you're listening to this. So whether it's Apple or Spotify or whatever one you're listening to this podcast on. So leave me a review, then screenshot it and send it over to me via email or like Instagram or LinkedIn DMs. So the email is just Christina@ChristinaSchmidt.ca, and I've got my other two things linked in the show notes there. So go ahead and just send it over to me. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, just leave a comment. Leave a comment for, hey, this was super helpful. I love the podcast, blah, 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 whatever it is. Leave me a review in the comment. And so that's the easier way to enter. So if that's something that you're interested in, the deadline for that is going to be October 20th, because on the 21st, I'm going to assemble all of those together, use like a random generator, and have a random generator pick that person for me. So if you want that opportunity, once again, leave a review, screenshot it, and send it to me, and you'll be entered. Easy peasy, and you get the free assessment, and you get to be a guest on my podcast. So super exciting. Second thing, Thrive is coming up at the end of October. So if you would like to understand how to really do the best level of feedback, because you've built the safe space, you've built the trust in the relationships, people know where you're going because you've got great expectations set. If you would like to be part of that, then hop onto my website, ChristinaSchmidt.ca/thrive, and you can learn more about that. You can book to be in the course right there on there. Or if you've got more than one people, then just reach out, book a 30-minute meeting with me, and we'll just chat about it a bit. See if it makes sense for you or your company. So if you would like to know more about that, just go to my website, check it out. And I hope to see you on there. So we start October 29th for Thrive. And the deadline to register for that is going to be the 21st as well, to make sure we can get you the books. So lots of stuff happening on the 20th and 21st. So hop onto my website, leave a review for the podcast, subscribe if you haven't already, and please share the podcast and information about Thrive with a friend. And I will see you next time on the next episode of the Business Building Blocks podcast. Thank you for listening to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about all things people and organizational wellness, because quality people and processes are at the heart of every successful business. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you know when new episodes are released. You can also follow me on Instagram at ChristinaSchmidt.ca, where I share real-life tips to help in your leadership and life journey. To get one-on-one and team support with your leadership development, book a discovery call on my website at ChristinaSchmidt.ca. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.